700 meters. That is the terrifying distance of the drop into the void, a silent, screaming descent into nothingness. It is the ultimate non-negotiable tax demanded by the mountain for merely blinking at the wrong moment or rushing a safety clip by a fraction of a second. Phurba Ongel Sherpa was not just a climber. He was mountaineering royalty, a man who breathed thin air as easily as we breathe at sea level. Yet during a brutal winter campaign on Makalu, even his expertise could not save him from a deadly invisible snare laid out for the most experienced pros and experts' trap. While his brother was still paralyzed by the shock, his mind unable to process the sudden void, where Phurba had just been standing, the nightmare compounded. Their client, an Iranian climber named Abolfazl Gozali, made a catastrophic error. Blinded by the swirling snow and consumed by the chaos, he took a single irreversible step into the whiteout. He was defying a direct, screaming command to stay put. It is a haunting paradox of the Himalayas. How can the same majestic peak that grants you a fleeting moment of godlike triumph turn around and devour you seconds later? In the blink of an eye, the mountains stripped them of their lives and transformed them into frozen eternal sentinels, guarding its unforgiving, icy flanks. But the seeds of this tragedy were sown decades before that devastating winter day. We have to look back to July 30th, 1981, in the remote and rugged Sankuasaba district. This is the precise coordinate where our story originates, centering on a man whose fate was sealed from his very first cry. Phurba Ongel Sherpa was born in the Makalu 09 sector, and it seems the universe played a cruel geographical joke. On him, his destiny was welded to this map location. He learned to walk in the immense shadow of the very giant that 45 years later would claim his life. He didn't just grow up near the mountain. He was raised in its dark, freezing embrace, playing in the foothills of the beast that would eventually become his tomb. However, there was another shadow looming over young Phurba, one even more imposing than the granite walls above. It was the colossal reputation of his own blood, his brother Sanu Sherpa. You need to remember that name. In the rarefied air of high-altitude climbing, Sanu isn't just a man. He is a mythical figure, a titan walking among mortals. He holds the distinction of being the only human being in history to have conquered all 14 of the world's 8,000-meter peaks not once, but twice. Just try to visualize the pressure of growing up and trying to find your own identity next to that level of absolute, untouchable greatness. That proximity to greatness defined the trajectory of Phurba's entire existence. Instead of fighting it, he accepted the hierarchy of the mountains. He embraced the role of the ultimate number two. While Sanu was out there shattering world records and grabbing headlines, Phurba quietly became the backbone, the unbreakable support system that made those feats possible. He grasped a fundamental truth about the death zone that many ego-driven climbers miss. At 8,000 meters, you do not need a competitor trying to outshine you. You need a partner who would put their life on the line to watch your back. Phurba refused to settle for the stereotype of the strong, silent porter hauling gear. He treated mountaineering as a high-stakes career blending physical power with intellect. He hit the books hard, mastering both English and Hindi, ensuring he could communicate flawlessly with international clients from any corner of the globe. He didn't just rely on experience, he legitimized it. He earned an official government-recognized mountain guide license, cementing his status with hard credentials rather than just empty boasts or campfire stories. He evolved into an elite technical specialist, the kind of guy you call when the mission is impossible. He built a stable domestic life in Kathmandu, where his wife waited for his safe return, structuring his entire reality around one sacred rule. The rule was simple: always come home. He was calculated, meticulous, and terrifyingly professional. By January of 2026, he had reached the absolute zenith of his physical and mental capabilities, prepared to support his brother on an expedition that was supposed to be their crowning victory lap. But that kind of invincible reputation is not something you are born with. It is forged in fire and ice. To truly comprehend why Phurba was the chosen one for this suicidal winter marathon, we need to rewind the timeline. We need to go back to the origin point, to the spring of 2009. Phurba made a decision that would permanently separate him from the army of anonymous high-altitude workers. He set his sights on Annapurna 1. In the climbing community, you don't just say that name, you whisper it with a shiver. This is not merely a mountain. It is a statistical slaughterhouse holding the grim title of the deadliest 8,000-meter peak on Earth. Its horrific reputation doesn't come from technical difficulty or vertical walls, but from its terrifying, chaotic unpredictability. On Annapurna, the law of the land is objective danger. It is a clinical term for a nightmare scenario. It means your years of training, your Olympic-level fitness, and your perfect technique mean absolutely nothing. You could be the greatest climber in history, and Annapurna would not care. It will casually release millions of tons of ice and snow onto your head, simply because gravity decided it was time. Let the numbers sink in for a moment. Up until 2012, the death rate on this beast hovered around 32%. Picture yourself standing in a rope team of 3 friends. The math is cold and brutal. One of you is destined to die. Every third climber is claimed by the mountain, their body left to freeze on the slopes. Sure, modern technology has dragged that number down to 15 or 16%. But let's be honest, that is still a game of Russian roulette. Phurba stepped into that arena during the dark, deadly days, and he beat the house. He stood on the summit at 8,091 meters, but the real victory wasn't the top. The victory was that he survived the descent and came home. The impact of surviving Annapurna was instantaneous. Phurba immediately transcended the ranks of ordinary Sherpas. When expedition managers saw Annapurna summit on his CV, they understood one thing immediately. They knew this man was the genuine article. Surviving that mountain proved he possessed something far more valuable than lung capacity. He had a primal animalistic survival instinct. He possessed a sixth sense that allowed him to read the mountain's mood and make split-second life-or-death decisions while others stood frozen in panic. He proved he could function in total chaos without losing his mind. It was the forge of Annapurna that hammered him from a simple porter into a master mountaineer, the very master who years down the line would be entrusted with human lives on the deadly slopes of Makalu. But first, the summer of 2012 transports us to a radically different theater of war. We abandon the lush, humid valleys of Nepal for a landscape that looks like Mars. We land in the jagged, hostile world of Pakistan. Phurba Ongel Sherpa arrives in the Karakoram range. Here, the air sucks the moisture right out of your skin, the rocks are razor sharp, and the queen is K, too chuggery, the savage mountain. If Annapurna is a gamble with luck, K2 is a brutal, unforgiving final exam of pure technical ability. The 2012 season goes down in history as particularly ferocious. The weather systems in the Karakoram are violent, shifting not day by day, but minute by minute, trapping climbers in their tents for weeks as the storms rage outside. Scores of expensive expeditions packed up their base camps and retreated defeated before they even touched the upper slopes. But Phurba refused to budge. He stared up at that perfect geometrical pyramid piercing the sky at 8,611 meters, and he geared up for a job that shares no DNA with Everest. On Everest, despite the altitude, there are long, flat sections where you are essentially just walking. On K2, there is no walking. There is only climbing. It is a vertical, muscle-shredding marathon from bottom to top. A climber here must be a high-altitude gymnast wearing a bulky, down-filled spacesuit. Phurba was operating on terrain so steep that for hours his entire existence depended on the front 2 points of his crampons and the tip of an ice axe. The angle is so severe that if you drop a water bottle, it won't hit the wall. It will fall all the way to the glacier at the bottom without touching a thing. This requires a colossal reservoir of physical power and a level of mental focus that you have to sustain unbroken for days. One slip is the end. He navigated the notorious bottleneck, a claustrophobic couloir sitting directly beneath a terrifying, overhanging ice serac the size of a building where every movement must be precise to the millimeter to avoid triggering a disaster. He tagged the summit, the second highest point on Earth. But every veteran mountaineer knows the old adage, the summit is only the halfway point. On K2, the descent is historically where the mountain collects its toll. Bodies are broken, oxygen is low, and focus begins to drift, but the steep walls offer zero mercy for a tired climber. Phurba descended like a machine, cleanly, methodically, and without error. The second he unstrapped his crampons at base camp, his professional standing skyrocketed. He had proven to the global industry that he wasn't just a specialist on his local giants in the Himalayas. He was now a universal soldier of the high-altitude world. His victory on K2 during such a hellish season confirmed that he had the technical arsenal to dismantle any climbing challenge in any mountain range on the map. He was elite by global standards, not just local ones. After the high-octane triumph on K2 and the technical nightmare of Pakistan, the tempo of Phurba's career shifted gears. The adrenaline-fueled assaults were replaced by a steady, marathon-like consistency. He returned to Nepal and established himself as a cornerstone of the Makalu Adventure Agency. Now, the mountains weren't just personal conquests, they were his office. This marked the beginning of an era we could call the Everest decade. For a normal human being, standing on top of the world is a life-defining miracle, a story for the grandkids. For Phurba, it was just a Tuesday in May. He became the undisputed king of the high-altitude routine. Try to wrap your mind around this number 12 times. He stood on the roof of the world 12 separate times. That means 12 times he entered the death zone, that lethal altitude where the human body begins to die cell by cell with every ticking second. A glance at the geography of his climbs reveals a man who is nothing short of a master in his craft. 11 separate times he has taken on the beast, ascending via the classic southern route out of Nepal. This means 11 terrifying trips through the Khumbu Icefall, a shifting labyrinth of ice towers ready to collapse at a moment's notice. Then there is the exception that proves his versatility. On one occasion, he launched his assault from the north, tackling the Tibetan face. This is a place where the wind doesn't just blow, it screams, hitting with enough kinetic violence to flick a grown man off the ridge and into the abyss, as if he were nothing heavier than a feather. He has dissected the mountain from every angle, committing every jagged rock, hidden crevasse, and sudden drop to memory. To the casual observer, it looks effortless, almost genetic. Tourists see a Sherpa guide smiling behind sunglasses and assume he is immune to the thin air, that he simply doesn't feel the crushing lack of oxygen. But that is a fantasy, and a dangerous one at that. The reality is far more brutal. Every single step taken above the death zone requires a monumental, soul-draining output of energy that would break most elite athletes in minutes. Phurba isn't just dragging his own body up there, he is hauling the lives of his clients alongside massive packs filled with oxygen canisters and heavy survival gear. He breaks trail through thigh-deep snow where others can barely breathe. For years, he has functioned with the precision of a Swiss watch, transforming what should be a superhuman feat into a reliable, consistent service. In the aftermath of the tragedy that would come later, a cloud of confusion settled over his legacy. The media, hungry for content, exploded with headlines claiming he had summited 19 times, creating a storm of misinformation. Reporters chasing clicks and sensational angles inflated the statistics, likely confusing him with another climber sharing his common surname. However, the truth is written in the cold, hard data of expedition logs, which confirm exactly 12 successful summits. And let me tell you that doesn't stand taller than any exaggerated figure ever could. To walk into the death zone 12 times and return alive is a badge of honor that belongs to the elite. It requires no padding, no exaggeration, and no lies to be impressive. The closing chapter of this incredible Everest saga was written quite recently. In the spring season of 2024, Phurba completed his final summit of the world's highest peak and made it back down without a scratch. At this stage in his career, his knowledge of the high mountains was encyclopedic. Physically, he was a specimen, his physiology adapted to the oxygen-starved environment in ways that would put even the best Olympic marathon runners to shame. It was exactly this combination of deep experience and raw biological endurance that positioned him as the ideal candidate for what was coming next. He was ready for the ultimate upgrade in difficulty, a winter expedition, a beast that plays by an entirely different and much crueler set of rules. Yet if you look past the headlines of his Everest record, you find a hidden layer to his skill set, a depth of talent that very few outsiders were ever aware of. Phurba Ongel completely dismantled the lazy stereotype that Sherpas are just genetically gifted walkers. He proved that his mountaineering was cerebral, a form of high-altitude engineering where understanding the physics of the terrain is just as important as lung capacity. His climbing resume began to feature lines that would make even seasoned pros sweat. Just consider his experience on the south face of Lhotse. In the alpinist community, merely whispering that name conjures images of extreme danger and fatality. It stands as one of the steepest, most technically complex walls in the entire Himalayan range. We are talking about a vertical kilometer of sheer ice and rock, a place where hiking is impossible, and every meter must be fought for. This is true climbing territory. You are forced to hunt for tiny fingerholds and manage ropes on dead vertical walls, all while miles of terrifying empty space yawn open directly beneath your crampons. Phurba didn't just survive there, he thrived. His technique rivaled the best Western alpinists in the world. He moved across vertical walls with the same casual confidence that an average person displays walking down a sidewalk. And this mastery wasn't ancient history, it was proven again very recently, during the autumn of 2023 and again in the spring of 2024, right before the winter that would change everything. He stood on the summit of Ama Dablam. Rising to 6,812 meters, this peak is frequently dubbed the Matterhorn of the Himalayas for its stunning geometry. But don't let the beauty fool you. It is a monster. This isn't a simple snow trudge. It demands technical, mixed climbing, forcing you to switch constantly between gripping cold rock and navigating slick, bullet-hard ice. Phurba aced this grueling exam twice within the span of 6 months, demonstrating beyond a shadow of a doubt that his proficiency with ice axes and rope systems was razor-sharp, but he wasn't hoarding this knowledge. His career map expanded across borders into the Indian Himalayas, where he arrived not as a porter, but as a distinguished expert and mentor. On the slopes of Nunkun and Gupt Parbat, he donned the hat of a lead instructor. Think about the level of respect that commands. Foreign organizations were paying him to teach their own teams the art of mountain survival. It is the ultimate seal of approval, the highest form of professional validation one can achieve in this industry. He schooled them on the nuances of reading glacial terrain, constructing bomb-proof anchors, and making life-or-death decisions under pressure. It paints a picture of a man who was meticulously prepared for any hell the mountains could throw at him. So when January of 2026 rolled around, Phurba Ongel Sherpa was far more than just a strong back, capable of hauling loads at 8,000 meters. He had evolved into the complete alpinist, a technically gifted athlete who could dance up vertical ice sheets and manage complex belays in the most hazardous zones imaginable. This rare fusion of raw experience, refined technique, and leadership ability made him the linchpin for the upcoming siege on winter Makalu. The stage was set for his moment of truth. Looking back, every summer summit and every technical climb felt like a rehearsal, a long prelude leading up to this singular event. Now the spotlight turned to Makalu, the 5th highest mountain on Earth, and winter on Makalu, that is a different beast entirely. It is akin to stepping onto the surface of a hostile alien planet, a place aggressively designed to extinguish life. That season marked the launch of a project so bold it bordered on madness, the first ever attempt at a commercial winter ascent of this giant. Historically, this arena was reserved for the lunatics and the geniuses of the climbing world legends like Simone Moro or Denis Urubko. It was the exclusive playground of pure, unadulterated sport, a place where paying clients had absolutely no business being. But in 2026, the script was being rewritten. The organizers were gambling against history, attempting to shepherd a group up a route that was widely considered a suicide mission during the winter months. The complexity of the task was off the charts. It was a chaotic equation where every variable was an unknown, and the survival of the team hinged entirely on the grit of the guides rather than any mercy from the elements. Their primary adversary was invisible, yet terrifyingly physical, the jet stream. In the winter, this massive river of atmospheric power drops in altitude, essentially scraping the jagged summit of the mountain like a cosmic razor. Up there, wind speeds routinely scream past 100 kilometers per hour. We aren't just talking about moving air, we are talking about a dense, crushing wall of cold that can freeze even the most sophisticated modern equipment solid in seconds. The wind chill factor can dive all the way down to minus 60 degrees Celsius. Under such apocalyptic conditions, any exposed skin is a death sentence, and any open ground becomes a kill zone. Even the atmosphere at the lower camps is transformed into something unrecognizable. In the spring, base camp feels like a pop-up metropolis, buzzing with hundreds of colorful tents, humming generators, and endless chatter. Now it is gripped by a haunting, deafening silence. The city is gone, leaving a ghost town in its wake. Only a tiny skeleton crew remains huddled against the rocks, battered by the relentless icy gale. The sense of isolation is total and crushing. You realize with a shiver that there are no neighbors to call on. No backup is coming. And the most terrifying realization of all, the sky is effectively closed for business. Helicopters are essentially paperweights in these winter conditions. The combination of brutal cold and thin air reduces atmospheric density to the point where rotor blades simply cannot generate enough lift to bite into the air. Throw in the violent turbulence from hurricane-force winds, and the entire mountain becomes a strict no-fly zone. Even the ace pilots who pull off miracles during the spring season cannot push their machines above certain altitudes when winter holds the reins. The team was voluntarily stepping into the gray zone of risk management. If disaster struck in the upper camps, evacuation wasn't just a technical headache, it was a fantasy. The climbers are left completely exposed alone with the mountain gods, relying solely on the piston power of their legs and the sharpness of their decision-making. Into this frozen void stepped not a chaotic parade of tourists, but a small tactical squad. Their strategy hinged on mobility and speed rather than brute force or numbers. Leading this elite charge was Sanu Sherpa himself. And let's be crystal clear about who this man is. He isn't just an expedition boss. He is a walking, breathing legend of the high peaks. In Kathmandu, his name alone is a key that opens every door. But even a legend cannot conquer a winter giant alone. That is where Phurba stepped in, assuming the critical role of lead guide. The dynamic between them was something rare and powerful. They weren't just co-workers, they were brothers in blood and spirit. Their communication transcended language, relying on a shared instinct. A single glance or a subtle wave of a mittened hand was all they needed to synchronize. Sanu held the reins on the grand strategy. Phurba, meanwhile, was the master of tactics, orchestrating every movement on the route itself. Yet this defensive perimeter relied on more than just the two brothers. The squad was bolstered by a third heavy hitter, Lakpa Rinji Sherpa. Serving as a high-altitude guide, he completed the expedition's triangle of power. If Sanu was the calculating brain of the operation and Phurba was its beating heart, then Lakpa was the raw muscle, the engine ready to haul the heaviest loads and smash a path through snowdrifts where lesser men would collapse. With his arrival, what was once a simple partnership transforms into a high-precision military-grade squad. The synergy is palpable, creating a formation so tight and disciplined that finding a more dependable crew on these deadly slopes would be an impossible task. The paying members of this expedition are far from your typical thrill-seekers looking for a profile picture. These are hardened souls matched perfectly in grit with their Sherpa guides. Leading this charge is Abolfazl Gozali, a 42-year-old powerhouse from Iran, whose life has been consumed by a singular burning obsession with this specific peak. For Gozali, Makalu is not just a mountain, it is a nemesis that demands a reckoning. Only 12 months prior, he had launched a winter assault, battling his way up to 7,800 meters, only to have the mountain's ferocious winds crush his spirit and force him back down. That retreat left a bitter taste, a haunting sense of unfinished business that plagued his dreams for 365 nights. Now armed with the hard-won wisdom from conquering giants like Lhotse and Manaslu, he has returned to the arena determined to balance the scales once and for all. His drive is currently redlining, operating at an intensity that serves as both a potent rocket fuel and a volatile explosive. Joining him in this high-stakes gamble is Piyali Basak, a climber from India who brings her own fire to the expedition. She moves in lockstep with the team as they push upward, but the mountain has other plans. At Camp 3, sitting at an altitude of 7,250 meters, her physiology hits a wall, triggering a crisis that ultimately becomes her salvation. In the death zone, sickness strikes with the speed of a viper. It is here that Piyali demonstrates a profound clarity often missing in male counterparts driven by ego. She swallows the bitter pill of retreat, prioritizing survival over glory, and begins her descent, leaving the men to face the beast alone. While this choice erases her name from the potential list of summiters, it guarantees she will live to climb another day. With her departure, the remaining squad contracts hardening into a streamlined fist, ready to punch through the atmosphere. This shift necessitates a complete overhaul of their battle plan. The strategy of laying a heavy siege, slowly bleeding the mountain into submission, is discarded entirely. They possess neither the time to fix miles of safety lines nor the manpower to stock a chain of supply camps. Instead, they pivot to a tactically aggressive style that borders on pure alpine climbing. Strike fast, strike hard, and get out. It is a strategy fraught with peril, relying on threading a microscopic needle through a fleeting weather window. Their only defense against the inevitable storms will be the raw instinct and accumulated knowledge of their Sherpa guides. Phurba, Sanu, and Lakpa are shouldering a burden of titanic proportions, shepherding their client into a realm where a single misstep or delay equates to a death sentence. As they reach Camp 4 at 7,400 meters, hovering at the very gateway to the stratosphere, abstract theory dissolves into terrifying practice. The team now stands on the precipice of the final assault. Hesitation is a luxury they cannot afford. The meteorological data is unforgiving, screaming that their window of opportunity is slamming shut with every passing second. With no cards left to play, they push all their chips to the center of the table, fully committing to a velocity-based strategy that leaves them dangerously exposed. They step out onto the exposed face, stripped of the heavy logistical armor that usually protects climbers from the elements. In a move that defies standard commercial protocol, Sanu and Phurba make the call to leave the heavy coils of fixed rope behind. They are effectively severing the umbilical cord of modern mountaineering, that continuous safety line that typically connects the safety of the tent to the glory of the peak. From this point forward, the only thing separating them from the infinite drop is their own technical prowess. However, this gamble grants them a massive injection of speed. They are no longer bogged down by the grueling labor of drilling ice screws, hammering pickets, and stringing lines, saving precious hours of oxygen and energy. They are, for all intents and purposes, sprinting toward the sky, racing to slip through the mountain's defenses before the weather hammer falls. As the summit looms tantalizingly close, the proximity of the goal begins to anesthetize their appreciation of the mortal danger they are in. Yet this is exactly where the trap is sprung. Caught in the adrenaline of the ascent, it is easy to forget that fixed lines are not primarily for getting up. Adrenaline and muscle can handle gravity, but they are the only insurance policy for getting down. The ropes are the lifeline for the return journey, the only thing to hold on to when the body is utterly drained and the brain is swimming in a hypoxic fog. When the adrenaline fades and the legs turn to jelly, there will be no synthetic fiber to grip, no anchor to arrest a stumble. In that compromised state, a minor slip ceases to be a momentary scare and transforms into a terminal event, an uncontrollable, accelerating slide into the void that no amount of willpower can arrest. For a few golden hours, however, it appears that fortune favors the bold. The mountain seems to blink. On the morning of January the 15th, the chaotic rage of nature subsides, granting them the rarest of gifts, absolute silence. The screaming jet stream, which had been scouring the summit like a buzzsaw for weeks, suddenly lifts into the upper atmosphere, leaving the peak of Makalu in a breathless vacuum of calm. This is the golden hour they had staked their lives on. The gray shroud lifts to reveal a sky of piercing crystalline blue, and the climbers surge through the opening. The first conquerors to break the tape are the expedition leader and his determined client, reaching the apex at 10:30 in the morning. Static on the radio gives way to a jubilant transmission. Sanu Sherpa and Abolfazl Gozali have claimed the highest point. For the Iranian mountaineer, this is not just a physical location. It is the emotional summit of a lifetime. Just 1 year ago, he had stood broken on these same slopes, battered by the wind and gazing up at the summit as if it were a hallucination. Today, he has exorcised those demons and settled the debt. He stands tall at 8,485 meters, the curvature of the earth, visible below his boots. Exactly 60 minutes later, around 11:30, the victory is compounded as Phurba and Lakpa Rinji haul themselves onto the knife-edge ridge. The tableau is now complete. Every single member of the assault team occupies the summit of Makalu, a peak notorious for being one of the most inhospitable and lethal environments on Earth. It is a result that defies expectation. In the brutal calculus of winter mountaineering, where simply returning with all toes attached is considered a win, achieving a 100% summit success rate is nothing short of a statistical aberration, a bona fide miracle. Sanu would later encapsulate the emotion of that moment in a single powerful word: ecstasy. A potent chemical cocktail of pride and endorphins floods their systems as they embrace snap-proof of their conquest and briefly pull down their masks to sip the thin, biting air of pure victory. A deceptive sense of finality washes over them. They believe the war is won. They have outmaneuvered the cold, outwitted the wind, and achieved the impossible for a commercial squad in the dead of winter. But it is precisely at this zenith of triumph that the mountain prepares its most insidious ambush. Drunk on their own success and the stunning view, their tactical discipline begins to fray. The dazzling sunlight and uncharacteristically still air weave a dangerous illusion of benevolence. They feel accepted as if the mountain has bowed to their will. In reality, Makalu has not surrendered. It is merely holding its breath, waiting for the perfect moment to snap its jaws shut. Standing on the roof of the world, they commit the cardinal sin of alpinism. They forget that the summit is only the halfway point. The most lethal phase of the expedition, the descent, still lies in wait. The true trial is only just initiating. The high of the summit will soon evaporate, replaced by a monstrous bone-deep fatigue, and the eerie calm is destined to shatter under the weight of the returning storm. They turn their backs on the view and begin the downclimb, each step taking them deeper into a zone where the mountain has laid a geological booby trap. The team drops altitude, eventually reaching the 7,400-meter mark. Here, the architecture of the mountain undergoes a radical shift. The terrifying vertical walls and knife-edge ridges flatten out, giving way to a vast, sweeping plateau that extends beneath the feature known as the French couloir. To the exhausted eye, this expanse appears as a divine gift. After hours of clinging to precipitous faces, the brain interprets the flatness as sanctuary, sending a treacherous signal to the climber's nervous system. You are safe now. Relax, breathe. It creates a complete hallucination of security resembling a gentle snowfield, suitable for a Sunday stroll. However, this innocuous appearance is actually Winter Makalu's most lethal camouflage. This is where the brutal physics of extreme cold dominates. The relentless winds, which have hammered this face for months on end, have functioned like a cosmic sheet of industrial-grade sandpaper. Every trace of soft snow has been obliterated, scouring the surface down to the mountain's skeletal bedrock, the dreaded blue ice. This substance is a geological anomaly possessing the compressive strength of reinforced concrete and the friction coefficient of polished glass. When a climber plants a boot on this unforgiving sheet, there is no reassuring crunch of steel biting into frozen water. The sharp points of the crampons fail to penetrate the armor, skittering uselessly across the surface with a sickening, nerve-wracking metallic screech. The fundamental laws of motion are rewritten here. On a vertical wall, tension and grip keep you alive. On this horizontal sheet of glass, you are entirely dependent on friction, a force that has been effectively eliminated from the equation. The slightest deviation in posture, a momentary shift in the center of gravity, results in catastrophic failure. Before the brain can register the error, feet are swept out from underneath, launching the body into a slide. Self-arrest techniques are rendered futile. Swinging an ice axe into this surface is like striking a marble floor. The pick simply ricochets off the monolith with a jarring clatter. It is a phenomenon grimly referred to by veterans as the expert's trap. Even the most battle-hardened guides, men who have danced with death on vertical ice falls, are susceptible to letting their guard down on these deceptively flat sections. The adrenaline fades and vigilance wanes. Believing the worst is behind them, they switch to autopilot, blissfully unaware that they are no longer walking on a path, but stepping onto a tilted ice rink that greases the rails for a one-way trip into the abyss. It is precisely right here upon this plateau that looks deceptively flat and welcoming where a climber's mental focus hits a dangerous low point. Yet paradoxically, this is exactly where the penalty for a single error skyrockets to the absolute maximum. Tragically, Phurba is destined to be the example who proves this brutal law of the mountains. The entire narrative arc of this expedition, the massive scale of the looming disaster, suddenly collapses into one microscopic moment in time. The survival of the team and the difference between life and death boils down to a single sharp metallic noise that fails to ring out across the ice. That missing sound is the mechanical click of a safety carabiner locking into place. Phurba Ongel is traversing this glassy sheet of ice, positioning himself slightly ahead and below the main group to establish the rhythm for their descent. Every move he makes is fluid, the result of decades of honing his craft. His muscles instinctively know how to handle the terrain. However, it is right here, at an altitude of 7,400 meters, that his vast experience backfires. His professional confidence betrays him, leading him straight into the psychological phenomenon known as the expert's trap. As we discussed earlier, complacency is the killer of the competent. His eyes lock onto a crucial detail strands of old fixed ropes lying dormant against the slope. These are the ghostly remnants of expeditions from years past, fibers bleached white by ultraviolet radiation and cemented into the glacier. By any standard, they could still serve as a lifeline. They are right there, literally begging to be used, sitting within an arm's length. Every safety protocol in the book is screaming at him. Clip in, secure yourself. The mechanics of the safety maneuver are trivial. You stop, snap the gate open, hook the rope, and screw the lock shut. In the real world, this takes 3 seconds. But when you are down climbing at the absolute limit of human biological endurance, fresh from the death zone, those 3 seconds feel like a lifetime. They require you to break your flow and hold your breath. Phurba makes a split-second choice that to his oxygen-starved brain feels completely logical. He decides that pausing to clip in is a waste of precious energy. He scans the slope and misinterprets its gentle angle as safe. His internal monologue whispers a fatal lie. You have got this. You have walked lines like this 1,000 times before. Instead of securing himself, he simply walks alongside the old rope, using it merely as a visual reference point rather than a lifeline. In this terrifying moment, there is absolutely zero physical connection between his body and the abyss. Only his exhausted sense of balance keeps him upright. The catastrophe unfolds in the blink of an eye, unaccompanied by screams, just total suffocating silence. It takes only one imperfect step. Perhaps a crampon spike skitters off a tiny nodule of bulletproof ice, or his quadriceps simply fail for a microsecond, shifting his weight fatally. If this were soft snow, he would have simply toppled over, cursed his clumsiness, and stood back up. But this is blue ice, hard as concrete, and it offers no forgiveness. The slip instantly transforms into a slide, rapidly gaining uncontrollable velocity. Phurba instinctively attempts a self-arrest, a survival move, drilled into his muscle memory over a lifetime of climbing. He violently drives the pick of his ice axe into the slope, desperate to generate friction and break his descent. But the ice here is harder than steel. The metal pick fails to penetrate the surface. Instead of biting deep, it merely chatters across the glaze, chipping off useless crystals and bouncing away. There is no purchase to be found. His speed begins to increase exponentially, turning him into a projectile. In a cruel twist of irony, he hurtles past the very rope he chose to ignore just moments ago to save time. Gravity hands down its final, non-negotiable sentence. His body shoots off the lip of the plateau, transitioning from a slide into a terrified flight into the void. Phurba falls for approximately 700 vertical meters. To help you visualize the sheer scale of this tragedy, imagine falling from a height equivalent to 2 Eiffel Towers stacked one on top of the other. 1 second, he was the master of his domain. The next, the mountain simply erased him, leaving nothing but swirling snow and the horror of an irreversible error. The silence that follows the fall is brief, swiftly replaced by the shattering of the world for those still clinging to the ridge above. Up on the traverse, where moments ago there was the satisfaction of a summit, there is now only the hollow howling of the wind and the ragged, panicked breathing of Lakpa Rinji. It falls on his shoulders to deliver the message that no one ever wants to hear. Lakpa scrambles toward the expedition leader, Sanu Sherpa. Sanu does not need words. He understands the situation instantly. Through the tint of his ski goggles and over the roar of the gale, he sees the distinct tracks of tears cutting through the frost on his friend's face. The brutal reality slams into him with the force of an avalanche. His brother, his blood, his most trusted partner, has just been swallowed by the deep. In that split second, Sanu's mind fractures. His years of disciplined guiding, which demand ice-cold logic, go to war with his primal instincts as a grieving brother. If he were following the strict letter of international mountaineering protocol, the path is clear. In an emergency, the guide's primary and absolute allegiance is to the client's survival. The textbook move is to calm the group, anchor them securely, and initiate an immediate organized evacuation. But here at 7,000 meters, human emotion overrides the professional handbook. Sanu makes an impulsive, heart-driven choice that will fundamentally alter the trajectory of this disaster. He pivots to his client, the Iranian climber Abolfazl Gozali. Sanu barks a harsh, non-negotiable command. Wait right here, do not move an inch. We are going down to check, but we will be back for you. Sanu leaves the client alone on that desolate, icy slope, effectively turning him into a stationary marker while he and Lakpa plunge downward. From a technical perspective, this is a suicide mission descending without ropes into the exact zone where a master climber just perished, but fear has no place in their minds right now. They are propelled by a desperate, illogical glimmer of hope that perhaps against all laws of physics, a miracle has occurred and Phurba is still alive. They navigate those terrifying hundreds of meters of vertical glass gambling with their own lives every single second, risking the exact same slip that took Phurba. The down climb feels like it stretches on for an eternity. But when they finally reach the impact zone, the last ember of hope is extinguished. They discover Phurba's body resting on a snowdrift. A cursory examination confirms the worst death was instantaneous upon impact with the rock bands. And now standing there, Sanu faces a new grim layer of reality. He stands over the broken body of his brother and realizes his total helplessness. The two of them exhausted, and at this extreme altitude, where the air is thin and the ice is slick, physically cannot haul a body back up the mountain. It is a matter of brutal, unyielding physics. Any attempt to move him now would simply result in the mountain claiming 2 more victims in the process. Sanu, a legendary figure who has stood atop the world's highest peaks, is forced to swallow the bitter pill of defeat. He whispers a final farewell to his brother, commending his spirit to the kingdom of eternal frost, and turns his back on the dead. He pivots back toward the living, unaware that the chaos of this dark day is only in its opening chapter. Sanu and Lakpa begin the ascent. They must return to the living. They claw their way back up that impossible ice wall, their lungs screaming for oxygen, choking back their immense grief. A single objective pulses in their brains: we must save the client. They have to retrieve Abolfazl Gozali shepherd, him safely down to the sanctuary of the camp, and only then do they have permission to collapse and mourn. It is the sacred duty of the guide, and it supersedes all personal pain. The climb back up from the death site consumes precious time and energy, but they conquer the vertical distance on sheer adrenaline and willpower. Finally, they crest the ridge and approach the specific coordinates where they ordered the man to stay. And they stop dead in their tracks. The spot is vacant. Where the Iranian climber should be sitting huddled against the cold and waiting for rescue, there is absolutely nothing. Just the wind scouring the bare ice. In that heart-stopping moment, the disaster spirals into a surreal nightmare. Sanu realizes that something irreversible has occurred. Gozali has violated a direct, frantic order from his expedition leader. Why would he do such a thing? You have to understand that at 8,000 meters, the human brain does not process logic normally. Perhaps waiting immobile in the biting wind became physically unbearable. As a climber begins to freeze, the primitive survival instinct screams one command: move now or you will die right here. Or perhaps the insidious voice of hypoxia whispered a false confidence in his ear, telling him he knew the route that he could navigate down alone while the guides were occupied. He makes a decision that feels like salvation in his confused mind, but in reality, he is stepping directly into the abyss. The situation is compounded by the weather, which chooses this precise moment to deliver a knockout blow. The mountain is suddenly swallowed by a meteorological phenomenon. Climbers dread above all else a whiteout. It is a terrifying sensory deprivation tank. The world loses all contrast and definition. The sky and the ground meld into a single suffocating milky haze. The horizon line is erased completely. In these conditions, vertigo sets in instantly. You take a step forward and have no idea if your boot will find solid ice or empty air. Your inner ear fails. Up and down become meaningless concepts. And it is into this blinding white hell that the lone client has wandered off. He is out there without a guide, without a safety rope, and bereft of any visible landmarks to orient himself. The wind acts as the mountain's eraser, scrubbing his footprints from existence within mere seconds. Gozali likely tries to grope his way toward Camp 4, but on Mount Makalu, missing the path by 10 meters is a death sentence. The slopes in this sector are a minefield of concealed crevasses and vertical drop-offs. It is highly probable that he simply veered slightly off the invisible safe line. Under the cover of the whiteout, he most likely lost his footing on that same unforgiving glassy ice, or perhaps wandered into one of the mountain's deep, inescapable couloirs. Sanu and Lakpa attempt a search, but the mountain keeps its secrets hidden in the mist. Abolfazl Gozali is never seen again. He never arrives at Camp 4, nor does he appear at any of the lower stations. The radio remains static. There are no distress calls, no signs of a struggle. He simply dissolves into the white veil, vanishing like a ghost into the thin air. The tragedy struck with the sudden violence of a whip crack. What started as a historic triumph crumbled in mere hours. The expedition didn't just stumble, it was effectively decapitated, losing both its most skilled guide and the client they had sworn to protect. Now, the survivors are stranded left to face a raging tempest with nothing but the crushing weight of the unknown to keep them company. As the white mist swallows the final glimmer of hope for a rescue, the complex logic of mountaineering evaporates. It is replaced by something far older and darker, pure animalistic survival instinct. There is no plan anymore, only the biological imperative to breathe for another minute. Sanu and Lakpa find themselves isolated against the full terrifying might of the mountain. They begin a retreat that carries far more weight than the climb up ever did. They have lingered in the death zone, that altitude, where human life effectively expires for far longer than the human body was ever designed to endure. They are running on fumes. Their bodies are completely depleted, and their oxygen tanks are dangerously light, sputtering towards empty. Their spirits are already shattered by the loss of their friends, making every single meter of the descent a brutal war of attrition. The frost is vicious, slicing through high-tech thermal gear as if it were nothing but wet paper. Lakpa Rinji is the first to fall victim to this invisible assault. It is a cruel irony. The very same powerful hands that carved a lifeline to the summit only hours ago are now being stripped of their vitality. He is losing the most precious tools a climber possesses. The cold is insidious. It bypasses the insulation of his gloves, driving deep into the knuckles and joints. It starts with a prickling sensation, a warning signal which fades into a comforting but deadly lie of warmth. Finally, there is the terrifying void, total numbness as the nerves simply shut down. Lakpa is a veteran. He knows exactly what this lack of feeling means, yet he is powerless to stop it. He forces his frozen claws to manipulate the ropes, clipping and unclipping carabiners with mechanical determination. He is consciously trading pieces of his own body to ensure the team makes it down the mountain. The toll exacted for this single day of survival will be nothing short of monstrous. In the safety of a hospital, later, doctors will deliver the devastating news with clinical finality: severe, irreversible frostbite. Lakpa is destined to lose 8 of his fingers to the ice. For a man whose life is the mountains, this amputation is a career execution. But in the freezing hell of the descent, he pays that price without hesitation just for the privilege of taking another breath. He isn't the only one breaking apart. The expedition leader, Sanu Sherpa, is fighting his own battle with a severely injured leg. Every time Sanu's boot hits the ice, a bolt of agony shoots up his limb. He forces himself forward, his legs churning with the mindless persistence of a machine. Yet this physical torture is a distraction compared to the colossal emotional burden threatening to crush his heart from the inside out. To understand the horror, you have to step into his mind. He marched out of base camp as a titan, the captain of an unstoppable force. Now he limps back as the commander of a devastated squad, his reputation and his team in tatters. He has left his own flesh and blood, his brother Phurba, to die in a tomb of ice miles above the clouds. He failed the client he swore to protect. It is a double impact of grief and failure that would snap the spine of even the strongest man alive. The journey down transforms into an endless pilgrimage of shame. The wind lashes at their frozen faces, screaming accusations with every gust. When they finally stumble into the sanctuary of the lower camp's tents, there is no sense of relief. It does not feel like a rescue. It feels like a defeat. It feels like a total structural collapse. Sanu drops to his knees, his spirit utterly pulverized. The hardened emotional armor that professional guides forge over decades of climbing disintegrates into dust in an instant. Here sits one of the world's elite climbers, a man who has stood atop all the 8,000ers. Yet huddled in that tent, he is forced to confront the brutal truth: this mountain has extracted a tax far higher than he ever thought possible. The summit victory, achieved only hours ago, now feels like a sick joke, a cruel twist of fate. That fleeting moment of glory is completely swallowed by the immense, howling emptiness they have dragged back down with them. However, even in this state of absolute physical and spiritual bankruptcy, the saga is not finished. Base camp refuses to roll over and accept the loss. The radios burst to life with urgent commands, mobilizing a desperate last-ditch counterattack against the mountain. The expedition operators trigger a general mobilization. They assemble a rapid response unit comprised of the toughest, most battle-hardened Sherpas available on the slopes. These men prepare to march straight into the teeth of a hurricane to save their brothers. It is at this precise moment that a scene unfolds which rivals the intensity of the darkest Greek tragedies. Sanu Sherpa, crippled and barely able to stand upright flatly, refuses the comfort of the tent. He demands a spot on the search team. There is no logic that can sway him. No amount of pleading from his colleagues can penetrate his resolve. The screaming agony in his leg is silenced by the roaring anguish in his soul. He straps his crampons back onto his boots, tightens his harness with shaking hands, and steps out into the black void. His goal is binary: find his brother and the client or die beside them. This is an act of pure, unadulterated self-sacrifice. His spirit is literally dragging his broken body upward, defying the laws of gravity and ignoring every instinct of self-preservation. The rescue squad begins the slow, tortured climb, fighting through the deepening roar of the gale. But the mountain has already locked the gates. The golden window of clear weather that granted them passage to the summit has slammed shut with the violence of a bank vault door. When the rescuers struggle their way up to Camp 4, they collide with an invisible, impenetrable barrier. Makalu has stripped away its mask to reveal its true, brutal winter nature. The wind, which had slept only yesterday, now screams with lethal intensity. Savage gusts lift grown men off their feet and pin them helplessly against the rime ice-covered rocks. The mercury reads minus 30 degrees Celsius, but that number is a dangerous lie. With the wind chill factor factored in, the air tears at the skin like it is minus 50 degrees. The rescuers realize the terrifying truth: the path ends here. Above Camp 4, the mountain has transformed into a living hell where survival is a mathematical impossibility. To push forward would be suicide. It would turn a tragedy involving 2 deaths into a mass casualty event with 10. The team leader stares into the white abyss, roaring above them, and is forced to make the hardest call of his entire life. He screams the order to retreat over the wind. Nature has placed a definitive full stop on the operation. They are forced to turn their backs and descend, leaving Phurba and the Iranian climber to the eternal silence of the ice, acknowledging that today the elements are vastly stronger than human courage. While an ice hurricane shreds the slopes of Makalu, a storm of a completely different nature is brewing in the heated, comfortable offices of Kathmandu. It is a silent storm made of paper and contracts, but it is no less destructive. As the initial adrenaline of the disaster fades, the invoices for the rescue, mobilization begin to land on the manager's mahogany desks with a heavy thud. Suddenly, a detail emerges that sends the organizers into a tailspin. It is discovered that the Iranian client Abolfazl Gozali had ventured into the death zone completely naked in a financial sense. The truth he had carefully obscured before the expedition launched is now laid bare. He has no valid insurance. More specifically, he lacks the critical high-altitude rider required to cover helicopter evacuations above 8,000 meters. In the world of high-stakes commercial mountaineering, this is the ultimate taboo. Embarking on such a lethal route without that paper shield is an act of insanity comparable to skydiving and hoping you can knit a parachute on the way down. Reputable companies usually demand to see the policy in black and white before a boot touches the snow, but Gozali managed to slip through the bureaucratic cracks. He had been intentionally vague about the details, perhaps gambling that he wouldn't need it. Now that small omission has metastasized into a catastrophic financial disaster. High-altitude rescue helicopters in Nepal are arguably the most expensive taxi service on the planet. Every single hour the rotors spin costs thousands of dollars, and the desperate attempts to battle the wind up to Camp 4 are incinerating the expedition's budget at an astronomical rate. The managers at Makalu Adventure begin making frantic, sweating phone calls. They reach out to the Iranian consulate, praying that the state will intervene to bring their citizen home, if only to provide a proper burial. The response from the diplomats is cold and immediate, like a steel door slamming in their faces. It is a hard refusal. The consulate makes their position crystal clear. They will not allocate government funds to search for a private adventurer. The organizers have hit a brick wall. The jet fuel has been burned. The pilots need their fees, and the Sherpas, who risked their lives in the hurricane, must be compensated. The services have been rendered. In the end, the company owner's sense of honor becomes his financial undoing. He is forced to liquidate personal assets to cover the bills. The expedition's projected profits are instantly vaporized, replaced by colossal crippling losses. This specific incident shines a spotlight on a massive, gaping black hole within the entire high-altitude tourism industry. It reveals that accepting clients with shaky international insurance or legal guarantees is a high-stakes gamble where the house often loses. The agency assumes 100% of the risk with absolutely no guarantee that anyone will reimburse them when the worst-case scenario becomes reality. The tragedy of Gozali becomes an incredibly expensive lesson for the entire market. At 8,000 meters, a solid financial insurance policy is just as vital to survival as the oxygen tank strapped to your back. While the accountants down in the city furiously tally the losses up on the mountain where the air is so thin it barely exists, a final ringing. Silence descends over the slopes. On January 22nd, nature itself signs the closing report on this ill-fated expedition. The wind refuses to yield for even a second. The operation leaders stare at the bleak weather forecasts and come to a grim realization: to continue would simply be feeding more lives to the mountain. On that day, all search and rescue operations are officially terminated. The fragile flame of hope that had flickered against the wind for the past few days is finally and permanently extinguished. When the sun rose on January 23rd, salvation finally descended from the clouds in the form of a rescue chopper. Mother Nature offered a rare, fleeting moment of mercy, parting the storm just enough to allow the living to escape her icy grip. As the aircraft touched down at base camp, the violent downwash whipped the loose powder into a blinding white frenzy, signaling that the nightmare was coming to an end. Sanu, his body battered, and his heart shattered into 1,000 pieces, was assisted into the cabin, alongside the base camp staff. As the turbine whined to full power and the skids left the frozen earth, the gravity of the departure washed over him. This wasn't just a flight to safety, it was the most agonizing goodbye of his life, a final severing of ties that hurt more than the cold. Pressing his face against the cold plexiglass, Sanu couldn't tear his eyes away from the retreating landscape. He watched in silence as the magnificent towering black pyramid of Makalu slowly drifted into the distance, standing tall and indifferent to human suffering. Slowly, the colossal mountain shrank until it was nothing more than a speck on the horizon. Yet Sanu understood that a piece of his spirit would forever remain trapped on those slopes. He was leaving, but he wasn't bringing everyone home. The lifeless bodies of Phurba Ongel and Abolfazl Gozali were staying behind, entombed in the thin air of the death zone. Makalu had tempted them with the glory of the fifth highest peak on the planet. Makalu had tempted them with the glory of a winter summit, allowing them a fleeting taste of triumph before cruelly demanding the ultimate payment in return. Now they are fused with the unforgiving ice and rock, becoming one with the savage terrain they sought to master. The news of this disaster sent shockwaves through the global climbing fraternity landing as a devastating blow that left even the most hardened alpinists reeling in grief. This tragedy serves as a brutal, unignorable warning that the abyss respects no one, regardless of their expertise. Phurba Ongel perished like a true warrior in his arena. He was at the absolute zenith of his physical power and widely considered one of the finest, most capable guides of his entire generation. He had accomplished what many deemed impossible, standing atop an 8,000-meter giant in the dead of winter. Yet his destiny highlights the terrifyingly thin margin for error in the Himalayas, where the boundary between legendary success and an icy grave is often invisible until it is crossed. It is a haunting realization that decades of hard-earned experience can be extinguished in a mere heartbeat. A lifetime of skill can be undone by a single second of silence by the ghost of a metallic click from a carabiner that never actually locked into place.